Good morning, Napa Valley Unitarian Universalists, and welcome to this week's online worship service. I am Lenore Hirsch, and I'm the celebrant for this morning's service. Our guest speaker today is Kai Marks. Kai Marks is a writer, teacher, and spiritual director who is also a member of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Redwood City. Kai is a graduate of the Caroline Mace Institute Education Institute programs, both in archetypes and in mysticism. And she's also a graduate of the Disney Institute program for excellence in leadership. She holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of San Francisco, and she currently serves as the head of school for Fusion Academy, Palo Alto. Brian Shaw is our musician, and May Vader is helping us with technology. May will be recording this service to post on our YouTube channel later on. Each week, we gather to connect with each other and to pay attention to both the beauty and the brokenness of our shared life on Earth. We gather to be part of something bigger than ourselves and to explore new relationships and ways of being.
Good morning, everyone. Our opening words this morning come from the poet John O'Donohue. Once you awaken to your soul, you know that you are no longer alone, nor are you at the mercy of your own frailty and limitations. Awakening to your soul, you begin to learn another way of being in the world. The old barriers no longer confine you, the old wounds no longer name you, and the old fears no longer claim you.
Come, let us bring our whole selves to this time together. Now is the time to center ourselves through music. Each week, we join Unitarian Universalists all around the world in lighting a flaming chalice, the symbol of our faith. You're invited to light a chalice or a candle at home now with these words from Bruce Southworth. For the gift of this day and for our community of spiritual nurture and compassion, we give thanks. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. May our many sparks meet and merge in communion of heart and soul. Let us now join in singing our opening hymn.
We would be one as now we join in singing our hymn of love to pledge ourselves anew to that high cause of greater understanding of who we are and what in us is true. We would be one in living for each other, to show to all a new community. We would be one in building for tomorrow a nobler world than we have known today. We would be one in searching for that meaning which binds our hearts and points us on our way. As one we pledge ourselves to greater service, with love and justice strive to make us free. Oh, make us free.
I invite you now into a moment of receptivity and reflection as we share the joys and sorrows of this community. We make sacred the milestones of our lives when we share them with each other. We have here a bowl of water and some stones. If you would like to share your joy or sorrow with all here, you can type it into the chat and then choose a stone in the bowl to represent your joy or sorrow. If you have a joy or sorrow, or even just a concern that you do not need to share with everyone, type stone in the chat and then choose a stone in the bowl to represent the milestone you are holding in the silence of your heart. If you are holding something heavy in your heart and would like to speak to a member of our pastoral care team, please reach out to us. Leave a message at 707-226-9220 and someone will contact you.
Now is the moment in our service when we dedicate time for silence and for listening to the still, small voice of the soul inside us. Please join us in a brief period of silent meditation. The music will be your cue that the silent meditation time is ending.
Bone. Understand, I am always trying to figure out what the soul is and where hidden and what shape. And so last week, when I found on the beach the ear bone of a pilot whale that may have died hundreds of years ago, I thought maybe I was close to discovering something. For the ear bone is the portion that lasts longest in any of us, man or whale, shaped like a squat spoon with a pink scoop, where once in the lively swimmer's head, it joined its two sisters in the house of hearing. It was only 2 inches long, and thought, the soul might be like this, so hard, so necessary, yet almost nothing. Beside me, the gray sea was opening and shutting its wave doors, unfolding over and over its time ridiculing roar. I looked, but I couldn't see anything through its dark knit glare. Yet don't we all know the golden sand is there at the bottom, though our eyes have never seen it, nor can our hands ever catch it, lest we would sift it down into fractions and facts, certainties, and what the soul is. Also, I believe I will never quite know, though I play at the edges of knowing. Truly, I know our part is not knowing, but looking and touching and loving. which is the way I walked on softly through the pale pink morning light.
Good morning. Before I get started here, I want to take a moment just to say thank you to all of you for having me. I wish that my first meeting with you were in person, and I really want to thank May and Lenore and Brian, who I haven't connected with, but who knows how to do wonderful music. And thank everybody for welcoming me and just doing such a fantastic job. It really is a pleasure to be here with you today. Part of the service title comes from what is perhaps an unlikely place, an episode of The Simpsons. If you're like me and you've grown up watching The Simpsons for the last 32 years, then it's likely you've heard someone use the expression, "I am familiar with the works of Pablo Neruda." And when the person says this, what they mean is, yes, it's obvious, or yes, everyone knows that, because that is the way Bart means this when he says this to his sister Lisa in the episode wherein Bart sells his soul for $5. Bart sells his soul to his best friend for $5, believing that there is no such thing as a soul and believing that he has a greater need in the short term for a bit of cash. To prove to everyone that he's right, Bart takes a piece of paper, writes Bart's Simpson's soul on it, and sells it, confident that he has outwitted his friend and made a handy profit. But almost immediately, curious things begin to happen to him. More on this a bit later. I suspect this episode resonates with so many people because many of us have asked the same questions Bart does. We've wondered if the soul is real. Perhaps we've even dismissed it or asked it to take a back seat to our own financial needs or our needs for security in the physical world. So what is the soul anyway? Well, for our purposes today, it may be helpful to think of ourselves as having three aspects to ourselves simultaneously. There's the ego, the spirit, and the soul. And we've moved back and forth through these parts of ourselves many times in a single day. Simply put, there's the ego that manages our identity and works hard to keep us safe in the physical world and keeps track of our history. There's our spirit or our self, the part of us that helps to keep us aware of how we're feeling and how we're experiencing things in the present moment. And then there's our soul, the even deeper part of us that connects us to all of eternity. So, for example, your ego might ask, what do I need? The spirit or self might ask, what do I want? And the soul asks, to what am I being called? Or for what reasons was I born? What is my purpose? And although we may have questions about the role of the soul in our lives, we instinctively know that the soul is there. Popular culture knows this. Many of you are likely familiar with the recent Pixar film Soul, or remember the countless references to soul in literature and in music. Our general culture, though, tends not to talk very much about the soul. And that's unfortunate because the soul has its own vocabulary. And the first step toward caring for one's soul is acknowledging that we do indeed have a soul. Next, it helps to recognize that the soul does have its own vocabulary. And you know that because the soul asks the deep and awe-inspiring and sometimes frightening questions. For what reason was I born? The soul asks questions that set change and transformation in motion. And because we have so many questions, we often depend on others, poets or writers perhaps, to tell us about our own souls. And while contemplation and exploration are important, these are most effective when we give ourselves permission to talk openly in safe settings about how we experience our soul communicating with us so that we gradually become more familiar with our soul that abides with us. The soul also thrives on honesty and truth. And we tend to feel at one with our soul when we feel at one with ourselves, when our mind and our heart are in alignment with each other. And perhaps surprisingly, which we also don't talk about very often, the soul thrives in an atmosphere of quiet. To better understand this, now let's consider the opposite. A person will have a harder time establishing a relationship with the soul in an environment that's filled with distractions. Literal or metaphorical noise can drown out the still, small voice. If we're having a difficult time facing a truth about ourselves or something in our lives, we might even nurture those distractions to keep from hearing what our soul is trying to tell us. And if this goes on too long, or if our soul is left unattended for some time, we might begin to feel soul sick. Not long after Bart sells his soul, for example, he begins to feel a kind of emptiness, a loneliness he can't quite define. His own dog and cat become frightened of him. Automatic doors stop opening for him. And the things that used to bring him such joy, like spitting from an overpass, no longer do. I suspect that many of us have suffered at different times in our lives from varying degrees of feeling soul sick without even knowing that that's what it is because we don't talk about it enough. We haven't given adequate time to develop our soul vocabulary, and we don't often give ourselves enough time and space for quiet. True soul companions, those friends who can be trusted to bear witness to the deepest parts of our lives, can be difficult to find. We may begin to feel disconnected from things we once loved. We may sense that doors are no longer opening for us. So what then can be done? Now, although we may laugh at Bart's decision to sell his soul for $5, the truth is that selling your soul is a common expression because we recognize the places in our lives where we ourselves or others have done this. Regret often comes after we've compromised when we or our soul knew better, or when we negotiated something precious to us for safety or security or even for sake of a relationship to another person. I've heard it said that if you're miserable in your job, but you stay in it anyway, and you still have options, look at your pay stub, because it will tell you the exact price you've placed on your own soul. Now, the good news is that our soul abides with us, whether we choose to be aware of it or not. And things usually go better if we do. Just as we would care for any living thing we love, there are some things we can do to maintain or to recover a relationship with our soul. Some of these include, but are certainly not limited to, the following ideas. Have a daily practice or a daily spiritual practice. Start small. Even 5 minutes per day is more than enough to set transformation in motion. I recommend making time for silence and time for listening to your still, small voice. If you're comfortable doing so, consider adding journaling, reading sacred text, meditating, or praying. In fact, a lot of good verbs that end in ing will work. Seek truth and practice honesty with yourself and with others. Remember to align your head with your heart. Seek out moments of awe and wonder. Consider getting yourself a spiritual director, someone who's trained to help you recognize and validate your own spiritual experiences and spiritual growth. This is also sometimes called taking a long, loving look at the real. Seek out soul companions and make time for meaningful conversations. We all need safe and inspiring people to bear witness to our lives. Reduce or eliminate distractions. And practice choosing faith over fear. A good question to ask ourselves is, what do we follow? And here's another way to think of the different parts of ourselves. Think for a moment about social media. Our ego might care very much about how many followers we have, but I will tell you, our soul could not care less. The soul asks instead, what do you follow? Do you follow others' approval? Do you follow fear? Or do you follow faith? Can you follow that still small voice of the soul that subtly but constantly calls you toward peace and toward purpose? In addition to calling us on toward destiny, our soul calls us toward the actions we need to take to heal ourselves. And while it may seem like everybody wants to heal, it's worth noting that we human beings are the only creatures capable of blocking our own healing. Sometimes, to be fair, healing can be intimidating because it requires us to change in ways that we find frightening. Or sometimes healing requires an act of forgiveness that may be difficult. I have a good friend who's fond of saying that the soul always knows what to do to heal itself. The challenge is to silence the mind. Now, because the soul is connected to eternity, it has an inherent quality of patience, and its signals to us tend to be more subtle, but also more persistent. If we make time for quiet and for contemplative conversation, we have a much better chance of hearing what our soul has to say. The challenge is, in part, to listen when we might otherwise be tempted to give in to our distractions. It's worth noting, too, that just as often, we can be the ones to help someone else to heal and to recover their soul. Take a minute. Think back now to a time when someone reminded you of who you really are, or stopped to remind you of the deepest desires of your heart. Or maybe they said something that allowed you to come home to yourself. We can almost always find a way to do this for another person. And it's often easier to do this for someone else, curiously, when we're first starting out on a spiritual journey. I often think back to an Anne Murray song that was popular in the 1980s called You Needed Me. I remember being very young when that song first came out and really hearing the line for the first time, I sold my soul, you bought it back for me, and wondering as a young person what that meant. Well, if we've lost our connection to our own soul, or perhaps we've not yet cultivated a relationship even for the first time, once again, we can learn from Bart Simpson. Gradually, after becoming more and more miserable, he realizes that he has indeed somehow sold more than a piece of paper, and he wants his soul back. So he sets out to find the paper, going all over town, but to no avail. And finally, in an ultimate act of surrender, he drops to his knees and he prays. He forms his own connection with the spiritual realm, saying, I sure could use some of that good stuff right now. And not long after this prayer, he discovers that his own sister had bought it back for him, just as we can do for one another. She gives him back his piece of paper and his soul. Our soul is all that good stuff. While our interior fears might tell us no, or what we can't do, or why something's not possible, or why we have every reason to be afraid, you know the soul, because the soul is the voice of yes. Think about a time when you've been at a crossroads and you wanted to make a decision. You might hear your soul whisper to you, psst, why don't you start by? Or, hey, you know, you've always wanted to. And in the very next instant, your ego delivers on your fears and reminds you of all your past experiences. But your soul, ever patient, holds out the bigger picture. And yourself, well, that's the part of you that has to make the decision in present time. And you, in that moment, will either act on what you know at that crossroads, or you'll choose to distract. These are the moments when people are most likely to take out their phones and play a round of Candy Crush. Now, why? I love Candy Crush as much as the next person. It's a great way to buy yourself some time to make a decision, but it's also a great example of a quick way to drown out the voice of your soul. But if you're able to stay in present time, and if you're able to say yes to the soul, what you'll find out is that although the soul requires us to face our fears and act with courage, our soul is still the voice of yes and gives us what we need to get there. If you think of great yes moments, you might think of James Joyce's Molly Bloom, or if you've seen the iconic movie When Harry Met Sally, those are big yes moments. Molly Bloom with I will yes, and I will yes, and I will yes. And Sally, of course, yes, yes, yes. Those are visual moments that you can think of. And that's what your soul does. It's yes, and it cheers you on, even through the things that seem impossible or frightening. And learning to follow the voice of yes is learning to follow the path of destiny for ourselves and for others. And it certainly requires having a quality of faith. It requires having that quality to look at a rose and say, yeah, I know it. I know it's going to open. Just because I can't see that yet doesn't mean I don't know what could come to be. So what does all this have to do with us, and why is it important? Because the soul is our companion on the path to realizing our destiny, and the surest place not only to develop a lasting relationship with that deep eternal part of us that helps us to triumph in trying times, but also to hear the subtle whispers of the voice that calls us toward all that brings us joy and fulfillment, toward all that we are meant to become. When we give care and attention to the keeping of our soul, we open ourselves up to the possibility of yes, and the kind of awakening that poets like John O'Donohue write about. Ultimately, whatever destiny looks like for each one of us, the path to purpose is the path to wholeness with a W and to holiness with an H. The phrase, we would be one, means to reclaim the fragments of ourselves. And we do this in part by pledging ourselves anew. to that high cause of greater understanding of who we are and what in us is true. And we can be sure that if we listen, the soul will always tell us what that is and what we need to do to heal ourselves. By searching for that meaning and by helping others to do the same, we can build a nobler world than the one that we have known today. The kind of world that binds our hearts and points us both alone and together on our way. It takes time and dedication and a practice, whether that's a practice or a spiritual practice, to reach the kind of awakening and freedom that John O'Donohue speaks about, and to cultivate a soul with courage and with stamina. So start small. Just acknowledge your soul. Build a relationship with what has always abided with you. Listen to your soul and to the souls of others. If you do this, even just the littlest bit every day, I can promise you'll accelerate your own healing, the quality of your relationships will improve, and you'll feel at one with yourself, as though you are coming back to the home you never really left, like Dorothy after Oz. And then, when someone asks you if your soul is real, you can say with confidence, yes, I am familiar with the works of Pablo Neruda. Blessed be.
Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This congregation depends entirely upon the generosity of its members and friends. All that we give in time, talent, and treasure is what sustains this community and makes it not just a sanctuary for us to return to for spiritual nourishment, but an oasis from which we can go out into the world carrying the waters of life. You can donate by going to our website at NVUU.org and clicking on the yellow donate button on the left-hand side, or send a check to NVUU at 1625 Salvador Avenue, Napa 94558. Once a month, our congregation donates our offering to a local organization that shares our values. Today, that organization is Collabria Care. Since 1979, Collabria Care has cared for the most seriously ill and vulnerable in our community. While it's best known for hospice services and end-of-life care, it has developed a unique continuum of care for anyone facing the transitions of aging or serious life-limiting illness. As Napa County's designated Alzheimer's Resource Center, Collabria Care offers cutting-edge care, education, and resources for those with Alzheimer's disease or dementia. Collabria Care is the only Napa-based nonprofit hospice organization, and with your generosity, they will continue to provide compassionate care to those in need, regardless of their financial resources. Here is a video presentation showcasing one of Collabria's services.
The beauty of the adult day services model is you get a really helpful person who's not just focused on this aspect of what you want, but they really listen to your whole story and try to connect you to the breadth of services that we have. What you walk into is the fun. What's behind the scenes is all of the medical care and services and support that is helping that person maintain. I really feel like the center we wrap our arms around the participant and the family and try to remove the barriers that make it challenging to be a caregiver and try to anticipate those needs for the caregivers to make any little detail easier that we can.
Follow me. Just come on the sidewalk. Yeah.
What was your favorite era?
My favorite era would have been when I first met my husband. Yeah, he was a cop and I was a dispatcher.
Yeah, Judy and I have been together close to 29 years now. She's been diagnosed with middle stage Alzheimer's, severe impairments. She can't find the bathroom. She gets up, she can't find the kitchen. It was obvious to her that things were not normal.
Dementia's not a good thing. She's a beast. I've tried to make friends with her. I've tried to do lots of things with her, but it just doesn't seem to work. And on days when she's being really ornery with me, I get mad at her.
There's times Judy had told me that she thinks I'd be better off with somebody else. She'd be better off in a home. She is sincerely just a real sweet individual. And it's sad to see what's happening, but there is no way to avoid it.
She takes your life away from you in a lot of ways. But luckily I have a husband that takes it back again, which is great. He's the best ever.
She's been coming down here for about 6 to 7 months. She enjoys socializing with the other people. Sometimes when I pick her up, she tells me that they were discussing current events. Other times about some of the music that they've been hearing.
What about rock and roll? Did you have any rock and
I
roll?
love rock
Because
and
I've seen you in here.
There's a lot of people there. A lot of them have issues. We've made friends, and it's been really good for me. We don't talk about, oh my God, I got dementia, oh my God, I got this. It's just, we just talk and have a good time and have fun. The center is making a difference in a lot of people's lives that have got that disease, and a lot of the people that don't have that disease but are surrounded by it.
Going to a caregivers group, you'll learn, obviously, that you're not alone in dealing with the situation. You'll learn from other people's experiences that have dealt with it, that with people that are further along. There are times when it seems like it is getting better, but it doesn't take long to realize that it's not better, and in fact, it's probably worse. There's times I want to pull my hair out. There's times I want to scream, but that's probably fewer and far between now. The more I deal with it, the more I learn. You have to keep telling yourself that what's happening is not Judy's fault. It's just something that unfortunately has happened. Each of you and I.
Oh gosh. We've been married for how long?
We've been together close to 29 years.
Yeah. I'm just as crazy about him now as I was then. And he's kind of crazy about me still. That's good.
Thank you for your many gifts. All you do and all you give are vital to building the beloved community in our region and beyond. If you are new to NVUU, we invite you to visit our website at nvuu.org and fill out the visitors form. This will get you onto our mailing list, and you will receive information about upcoming services and events. And I'm sorry, I forgot to say, all checks and donations will be sent to Collabria Care unless the check is marked as a pledge in the memo line. All checks should be made out to NVUU. The offering will now be gratefully received. And then I'll thank you. You can't thank people enough times. So thank you once again for your gifts. All you do and all you give are vital to building the beloved community in our region and beyond. If you're new to NVUU, we invite you to visit our website at nvuu.org and fill out the visitors form. This will get you onto our mailing list and you'll receive information about upcoming events and services. We also invite you to our Zoom social hour after the service at this same Zoom link. We'll take about 10 minutes in between to stretch, take a bio break, or have a snack. Then we'll be back. We look forward to seeing you back here. Now, please join in singing our closing hymn. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of love, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts out into the world until we meet again.
And so we come now to the end of our service, grateful for the blessings of the people in our lives, for those soul companions who accompany us on life's journey. As a new week unfolds before us, bright with the promise of a new beginning, may we listen to the still small voice inside us and help to build a nobler world than we have known today. One choice, one action, one step at a time. Blessed be.